Hello, my name is Tom Cull, and today I'm going to read one poem, a longer poem, from my 2023 collection, Kill Your Starlings. It was published with Gaspereau Press. Last Sunday was Father's Day, so I thought I would read a poem about my dad. It is called Autopsy Report. My dad's right arm and hand were small and paralyzed, locked into a tiger paw position, palm open, fingers bent at the second knuckle. His arm, wrist, and hand looked like the neck and scroll of a violin. We called my dad's right arm and hand the crink. My cousins called it tickle arm. When we were wrestling, Dad would yell, "Here comes the crink!" and whap me and my brother, swinging his arm from the shoulder like a whip. My dad taught shop and directed musicals at Central Huron Secondary School. My dad could build or fix almost anything. He was always lecturing us about the common lever, pulley, and inclined plane. My dad bought a chunk of land along the Manassatung River in 1967. A few years later, after he married my mom, he found an old pioneer log cabin in a field outside of Belgrave. He bought it and had it moved on a boom truck to our property. He attached it to our house and over many years fixed it up. Sometimes my dad got mad at the crink for dropping a nail that he had carefully placed between its index and pointer fingers. Sometimes he would hit the crink with the hammer as punishment, and my mom would say, "George!" His hand would bruise, but he couldn't feel a thing. My dad had a learning disability. He stayed in a class for what is now called developmental education until grade 7. My dad didn't learn to read until late into his teens. He went to restaurants where he had memorized the menu. When he became a high school teacher, he dictated student report cards to my mom. When my grandfather was dying in the hospital, my dad brought him an article entitled "Laughter is the Best Medicine," but read it out loud as "Laughter is the Best Machine," and we all laughed, even my grandpa, who had always been very protective of my dad's learning disability. Soon after he started teaching, Dad became department head of the Occupational Studies program. The students were often derisively called AUX. Dad created a co-op program that placed these students in apprenticeships with plumbers, woodworkers, auto mechanics, landscapers, and more. My dad was a tenor. He loved classical voice. The 4 tenors blasted through our house on Sunday mornings. My dad was the 4th tenor. My dad and I sang duets in churches. I once made the ladies in the front pews cry when I sang "All Things Bright and Beautiful." When my dad was 9 years old, he caught rheumatic fever. He had to stay in bed for almost a year. When my dad was a child and had to stay in bed for almost a year, my grandpa built him a little workbench for his bed so that he could make things with his tools. My dad's rheumatic fever gave him permanent heart damage. At the age of 34, Dad had open heart surgery to fit his heart with 2 plastic valves. After my dad came home from heart surgery, my mom guarded his door, worried my brothers and I would bust into his room and jump on his chest. My dad had a big scar from his sternum to his belly button. When my dad and I were swimming in the pond, I could hear his plastic valves ticking under the water. They ticked irregularly. Tick, 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 tick. When my dad attended concerts, sometimes people would ask him to put his watch in his pocket. When I was 30, I found in a box on the street a vinyl album called Heart Auscultation, Examples of Common Abnormalities. I wrote a plunder poem using the text on the back cover. The album was an instructional aid for medical students and included recordings of heartbeats and murmurs taken from medical phonocardiograms of normal and pathological hearts. My dad was married once before he met my mom. It lasted 3 years. She left him for another teacher in the department. After my dad's first marriage ended, he fell in love with a woman in his community choir. She was married. She died one night in a car accident on her way to see my dad at a motel. After the woman my dad fell in love with died in a car accident, he bought a white Camaro convertible with a red leather interior. He drove to Florida with 3 other teachers. In a photo, they are all wearing white t-shirts and black sunglasses. When my dad bought a white Camaro with a red leather interior and drove to Florida, his family thought he was probably working through a few things. On my mom and dad's second date, Dad cooked steak over a fire and served fresh blueberries with whipping cream for dessert. They were married 3 months later on a snowy Boxing Day in Ottawa. After my mom and dad got married, he sold the Camaro for $300 and drove my mom's Dodge Dart. My dad did not like swearing, and he was bad at it. If he got really, really mad, he would say things like, "Shit, fuck, fuck," or "cock, fuck." When my dad was not at work, he liked to work. Cutting down trees, planting trees, putting additions on the house, gardening, moving big rocks around with the tractor. When my dad was not at work, he wanted his boys to work with him. If I said no, he'd say, "Well, why don't you go watch TV all day and eat jelly donuts?" My dad and I didn't get along very well when I was a teenager. We often got into it at breakfast and dinner. My marks, my nights out, my sleeping in, chores, my appearance. He called my hockey hair the green puke, or the yellow puke, or the red puke. My dad could not sleep soundly until all his boys were home. He would often patrol the house and property late at night, naked, carrying a flashlight. My brothers and I called him the Midnight Schwangler. At breakfast, we'd sing, "Talk about the Midnight Schwangler, the one you saw the night before." My dad could make my mom so mad sometimes. She once threw a piece of toast at him and ran upstairs. When I was a kid, I heard my mom and dad having sex one night. There was heavy breathing, and my mom said, "George, you'll hurt yourself." In 1998, when my dad was 62, he had a dissecting aortic aneurysm. He died in the hospital. The night before, he had been doing drywall at my grandma's house. At my dad's funeral, one of his old teaching buddies recounted how when my dad first arrived at the school, everyone wondered, who was this man with the Gamby hand? At my dad's wake, my friend Todd got drunk and told me he was going to punch the man at the funeral who said my dad's hand was Gamby. On the day of my dad's funeral, I got a haircut at Lawnmower Lloyd's in Blythe. $3.50 a cut. While Lloyd was cutting my hair, In Memoriam came on the radio and announced my dad's death. Lloyd said, "He was in here a few weeks ago. He was telling a young girl who was waiting with her mom a story about dragons." My haircut was free. Years after my dad died, I moved home temporarily to help get the farm ready for sale. I hired plumbers, roofers, contractors to do the work. Over the course of the year, I met several men who had had my dad as their teacher. They all praised his patience, his care, his demand for discipline and hard work. A few years ago, my mom wrote a poem about my dad. The poem ends with details from his autopsy report. Build, moderately obese. Brain, unremarkable. Heart, massively enlarged. thanks so much for tuning in.